There is a specific kind of grief that nobody warns you about, and it has nothing to do with losing a person. It is the grief of walking into a kitchen and realizing that something is gone, something you cannot name right away, something that hummed and smelled and clattered in a way that made you feel like the world was held together. If you grew up spending time in your grandmother's kitchen somewhere between the 1940s and the 1970s, you know exactly what I mean. And today we are going back there together, one item at a time, all the way down to the thing that mattered most of all. Number 10. The stovetop percolator. You remember the sound before you remember anything else. That soft, rhythmic blooping, like a tiny heartbeat coming from the back burner, punctuating every early morning. The stovetop percolator was not a coffee maker in the way we think of coffee makers today. It was a presence. A cast aluminum or speckled enamelware pot with a glass bubble in the lid, and through that little dome of glass you could watch the coffee climb up the center tube and shower down over the grounds again and again, growing darker with each pass. Brands like Miro and West Bend and the iconic blue speckled granite ware version were fixtures in American kitchens for decades. The percolator did not hurry. It could not be rushed. It required about 8 to 10 minutes on a low flame, and if you turned the heat too high you scorched the coffee into something bitter and terrible, so you learned patience whether you wanted to or not. The smell of percolating coffee in the morning is one of those sensory memories that lives in the body rather than the mind. It is not something you recall so much as something you feel, somewhere between the chest and the stomach. Grandmother's kitchen smelled of that coffee before she had even tied her apron. And when she poured it into the heavy ceramic mugs, the coffee was strong and serious, and it meant the day was about to begin. Number 9. The bread box. Somewhere on the counter, usually toward the wall, usually made of tin or chrome or painted metal with a roll-top lid or a hinged door, sat the bread box. It was not decorative, not in the way we might use the word decorative today. It was a working object with a working purpose. In the era before bread came sealed in plastic bags with oxygen barrier packaging, homemade bread and bakery loaves needed a place to live that was neither the open counter nor the refrigerator, where bread would stale faster than anywhere else. The bread box maintained just enough airflow to keep the crust from going soggy while slowing the drying out of the crumb. Grandmother opened that bread box a dozen times a day. For toast in the morning, for a sandwich at noon, for a slice alongside supper. The hinged lid or roll top made a particular small metallic sound, and inside it always smelled faintly of flour and yeast and something close to warmth itself, even when the loaf inside was entirely cold. There were also manufacturers who made bread boxes in the 1950s with matching canisters, flour, sugar, coffee, tea lined up across the counter in painted metal sets with little labels in a cheerful script. The kitchen had a visual grammar back then, a logic of objects that told you where everything lived without anyone having to say a word. Number 8. Jelly jars as drinking glasses. This was not poverty. Let that be very clear. Across the economic spectrum of mid-century American households, the practice of saving glass jelly and jam jars for use as everyday drinking glasses was simply the sensible thing to do. Welch's grape jelly and many other brands during the 1950s and 1960s actually packaged their products in glasses that were designed to be repurposed, decorated with cartoon characters, seasonal motifs, or simple ribbed patterns that made them pleasant to hold and use. The Welch's Tom and Jerry glasses and the Howdy Doody sets were collectible even in their own time. But even the plain ones, the clear ribbed craft jars and the Smucker's strawberry jam glasses, found their way into the cabinet as perfectly serviceable everyday tumblers. Grandmother had the good glasses, the ones that came out for company, and then she had the jelly jar glasses, the ones that got used for orange juice at breakfast and cold sweet tea in August, and sometimes warm milk before bed. There was no embarrassment in them. There was instead a kind of elegant practicality, a refusal to waste anything that still had use in it, that characterized an entire generation shaped by the Depression and the rationing years of the Second World War. Number 7. The hand crank meat grinder. It clamped to the edge of the counter with a heavy iron screw, and once it was secured it was not going anywhere. The hand crank meat grinder, companies like Enterprise Manufacturing had been making them since the 19th century, and they were still selling briskly well into the mid-20th, was one of those tools that declared serious culinary intentions. This was not a gadget. It had heft and permanence and a certain industrial authority. Grandmother used it for meat, yes, grinding leftover roast into sandwich hash, making her own hamburger from a chuck roast, pressing cooked pork through the die to fill casings for sausage. But she also ran cooked vegetables through it for croquettes, passed hard-boiled eggs and pickle through it for deviled egg salad, cranked raw cranberries through it mixed with orange rind for the relish that appeared at every Thanksgiving without exception. The different die plates, coarse, fine, the one with the star-shaped holes, gave her options, and she used them all. Attaching it and removing it took 30 seconds. Washing it took another minute. It lasted not years but generations, because cast iron and carbon steel do not wear out if you dry them properly and keep them from rusting. Number 6. The flour sifter. It lived in the flour canister or hung from a hook inside a cabinet door, and it was one of the most satisfying objects in the kitchen to operate. A tin cylinder with a fine mesh screen at the bottom and either a squeeze handle or a rotary crank on the side, the flour sifter existed to break up clumps in the flour, to measure it accurately by weight rather than compaction, and to incorporate leavening agents evenly before they ever touched the wet ingredients. Grandmother sifted flour because the recipe said to sift flour and because she had watched her own mother do it, and she understood instinctively that baking rewarded precision in a way that stovetop cooking did not always require. The sound of sifting is not a sound the modern kitchen makes. It is a soft, whispering shower of fine white powder falling into the bowl, and the kitchen would go briefly quiet around it in a way that felt almost ceremonial. Flour dust would hang in a thin cloud over the bowl and catch the light from the window above the sink, and you stood close and watched because it was mesmerizing in the simple, complete way that only real things being done by real hands can be. Number 5. The junk drawer. Every grandmother's kitchen had one, and if you are smiling right now you know exactly which drawer it was. It was usually the one closest to the back door or nearest the telephone. And it contained, without apology or system, rubber bands of various sizes, twist ties saved from bread bags, a ball of saved string, a birthday candle or two left over from an occasion nobody could precisely date, a stub of a pencil, a coupon that had expired in 1962, a tube of rubber cement, a couple of stray buttons in case the ones on a coat ever gave out, several sizes of batteries with no guarantee any of them still held a charge, a spare key to something, and possibly a butter knife that had been demoted from the silverware drawer for reasons now lost to history. Do you remember reaching into that drawer as a child, absolutely certain that whatever you needed, a rubber band, a piece of string, a stub of pencil to write something down, was in there somewhere and almost always being right? That drawer was not disorder. It was the physical record of a philosophy. Nothing gets thrown away until it has proven itself truly, irreversibly useless. A generation that had known genuine scarcity did not discard anything that might still have work left in it. The junk drawer was the domestic expression of that conviction, and it was available to the whole family, at any hour, without asking. Number 4. The cast iron that never got put away. A well-seasoned cast iron skillet in the mid-century kitchen was not stored in a cabinet. It sat on the back burner or on the stovetop or on a specific hook beside the stove, because putting it away would have been like hiding a tool you used every single day. Lodge Manufacturing, founded in Tennessee in 1896 and still operating, made the skillets and Dutch ovens and griddles that lived in those kitchens. But many of the pans were older, passed down from the generation before, arriving in a household already black and smooth and full of memory. Grandmother's cast iron was seasoned not by any deliberate process, with a recipe and an oven temperature, but by decades of use. Bacon drippings, cornbread, pan gravy, fried chicken, apple cake, sausage, everything that had ever cooked in that pan had left something of itself behind, building layers of polymerized oil that made the surface better with every year. She wiped it with a cloth, sometimes a little salt to scrub, dried it on the burner, and put it right back where it lived. She would not have dreamed of washing it in soapy water the way someone would wash a regular pan, and if you suggested it, she would have looked at you the way you look at someone who has said something genuinely alarming. Number 3. The apron hanging by the door. It was not a fashion item. It was not a gift shop novelty with a joke printed on it. It was a working garment, hung on a hook just inside the kitchen door or sometimes on the handle of the pantry, always within reach, always ready. Grandmother put it on when she started cooking and took it off when she was finished, and within that ritual was contained a very old understanding: certain work is serious enough to dress for. The apron protected her dress or her house dress. Women in mid-century households very often changed into a house dress when they came home, a lighter, simpler garment for domestic work, and the apron went over that. It had deep pockets, always, because grandmother moved constantly between tasks and needed her hands free. A dish towel tucked into the apron string. A stub of pencil in the pocket. Possibly a grocery receipt. Possibly a button pulled from something that needed mending. Possibly a small hand belonging to a child who had grabbed hold and was following her from counter to stove to table. The apron was the uniform of the work that fed people, and there is something quietly powerful about honoring work with a uniform. Number 2. The transistor radio on the windowsill. Sometime in the 1950s, small, battery-powered transistor radios began to appear in American kitchens, and the effect was immediate and lasting. A radio in the kitchen meant that grandmother was never quite alone while she worked. Paul Harvey's noon broadcast. Arthur Godfrey in the morning. The weather report at the top of the hour. A hymn on Sunday. Big band on a late afternoon when the light was going golden. Regis Radio and Emerson and General Electric all made models small enough to sit beside the window above the sink, close to an outlet for the ones that used AC power, or propped on the ledge and running on batteries for the newer transistor models. The kitchen radio was not background noise in the way we might think of it now. It was company. It was the world letting itself into the room while the work went on, and grandmother sometimes hummed along to something without knowing she was doing it, her hands occupied with dough or dishes or green beans being snapped over a bowl, her mind half in the kitchen and half somewhere else entirely, wherever the music was taking her. And now we come to number 1. The kitchen table. Not the dining room table, where company sat and the good dishes came out and conversation was careful. The kitchen table. The one with the chrome legs and the laminate top, in colors like turquoise or red or butter yellow. The one with the chairs that did not match quite perfectly because one had been replaced after the leg broke. The one that was never fully clear of everything at once. There was always a salt shaker, an ashtray, someone's mail, a cup left from an hour ago. The kitchen table was the headquarters of family life in ways that no other piece of furniture could claim. Homework was done there while supper cooked, because the warmth and the smell of food and the nearness of someone who loved you made even long division bearable. Hard conversations happened there, because the kitchen was neutral ground, because there was always something warm to drink, because sitting across a table from someone rather than side by side on a couch puts you in the right relationship for saying what needs to be said and hearing what needs to be heard. Bills got paid there. Letters got written there. Grandchildren got their hair braided there while a radio played. When someone in the family was sick or sad or frightened, they came to the kitchen table. When someone had news, good or terrible, the kitchen table was where it landed first. It was the room where the family processed everything that happened to it, surrounded by the smells and sounds of food being made, which is to say surrounded by the evidence that life was continuing, that someone was still taking care, that tomorrow would also have a meal in it. The payoff that we have been moving toward this whole time is simply this. None of those objects, not the percolator, not the cast iron, not the transistor radio, were remarkable in themselves. What made them what they were was the accumulation. The way they occupied the same room together, decade after decade, in the presence of the same hands. The kitchen told you, without words, that someone had been here before you and had worked to feed people, and that you were part of that long, ordinary, irreplaceable chain. If you still have even one thing from that kitchen, a cast iron pan, a single jelly jar, an apron you have not gotten rid of yet, hold on to it. Not out of sentimentality alone, but because it carries something true inside it about what it means to make a home and feed people and show up every single day in a room where the work is never finished and the love is never in doubt. Tell me in the comments, what is the one thing from your grandmother's kitchen that you remember most? We are all listening, and every memory you share is one that stays in the light a little longer.